Okay, so welcome everybody. We're starting a partial new series this week. We're still doing Sefer Shemot, but Rabbi J wanted to start a new series with after Shavuot, and he'll officially start it next week because of everything going on in Israel now. But we're starting it this week, sort of an introduction to it, like we did last week, and it's basically the second half of Sefer Shemot. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'll share one more time the source sheet for those who didn't get it. That wasn't it. I needed chat. Here's the link again. And I'm going to share it with my screen. And we'll get started and see if I can find. Here we go. Okay, so today is class 17 in our long series. And I titled this next section, the Mishkan, a house for God, which is usually referred to. Vasru Mikdash for Shachanti Betocham. We'll talk about that pasuk later on. Or is a model home for us? Obviously, that's we're going to go in that direction to try to understand what the idea of the Mishkan is about. The main thing, I have one goal for today's class is just to appreciate simply a tremendous Ramban, one of the most important Rambans in Chumash. It's an anchor to understanding the whole topic of Mishkan, the whole topic of Mikdash, the whole topic of Tefillah, and also an opportunity to see how Ramban understands Chumash. Because of almost all the Parshanim write their commentary verse by verse and rarely share with you how they view an entire book. Unlike all the other Parshanim, Ramban, usually in the beginning of every book, except for Breshit, but in Shemot, in every other book, Shemot, Yikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, etc., his opening commentary on the book is an explanation of how he understands the book as a whole. And in Sefer Shemot, when he begins the topic of the Mishkan, he's going to go back and give a sort of an overview of how he understands the second half of Sefer Shemot, and that's what I want to review right now. First, a review of what we're all familiar with, starting in Parsha Yitro. We're going to outline the second half of Sefer Shemot. We'll see how Ramban's going to relate to all this. We have what I call Mamad Har Sinai, which is from chapter 19 to 24. It starts with Am Yisrael arriving in Har Sinai, making a covenant to be a nation serving God. We talked about that last week a little bit. Followed by the Dibrot. Followed by when the people get scared, and the special unit of the mitzvot, which we discussed last week, we call Parshat Mishpatim. And then the covenant in chapter 24, which we didn't talk about last week. We'll get back to it later on. But that whole unit, those chapters from 19 to 24, are all Mamad Har Sinai. They're what happens at Har Sinai, where Abisar takes upon himself a commitment to a nation serving God. We get the contract, and instead of laws, a basic set of laws, they're going to guide our communal behavior. Moshe goes up to Har Sinai in the end of chapter 24 to receive a set of laws. And the section that Sefer Shemot includes is the commandment to build a Mishkan from chapters 25 to 31. It's a unit which is super easy to identify. It begins with the commandment to build the Mishkan and all the parts of the Mishkan. So chapters 25, 26, and 27 are about the vessels of the Mishkan, the Aron, Shulchan, Menorah, the tent that surrounds it, and then the Mizbeach and the courtyard, the altar, etc. Then the priestly garments, the big day Kuna in chapter 28, the dedication ceremony, it turns them to Kohanim in chapter 29, ending with the daily Korban Tamid. And then some more laws, we'll talk about that additional unit in chapters 30 through 31, that begin with the Mizbach Toret and Machzit HaShekel, etc., and take us and end with how to build the Mishkan with Betzalel and a law about Shabbat. Then we have another unit called Chet HaEgel, which sort of picks up the narrative it left off in chapter 24. When this unit took place, of course, Ramban's going to keep Chumash in order. Chazal are going to take this whole unit, Roman numeral 2 here, commandment to the Mishkan, and put it after Chet HaEgel. We'll discuss that later in this unit, but not today. And then we'll actually build the Mishkan in chapters 35 through 40, which is by Kapkure, and we'll see how that relates and how that explains what happened in commandment to build the Mishkan, how it relates to how they build it. Now, first we're going to read the Ramban. I didn't find a Ramban online that had Nikud. If anyone has one, if anyone knows how to find a Ramban that has Nikud, please let me know. The truth is I could have put it into dicta, I just realized now. You can put a text into dicta and he'll do the Nikud for you.
They do it automatically, that's right. You could put the text.
I should have thought of that. Now he just reminded me now. I was going to ask AI to do it for me and dicta could do it. But in the meantime, we'll practice reading without Nikudot. First, we're going to read the Ramban. this is the Ramban in the introduction to chapter 25, the introduction to Parshat Truma. And I want to show you how he takes this outline that we just went through and how he ties everything together. Okay. Now, I call this 4 steps. He doesn't number it this way. I'm numbering the Ramban, identifying 4 steps in his introduction to his Pirush. Watch what he says. Again, we're gonna go back and see every step in Chumash itself, but I want to just follow the Ramban. We'll read it now in the beginning, and we'll go back and read it again when we're done. So I'll read slowly. Kasher diber Hashem im Yisrael panim b'fanim aseret dibrot. After God spoke to Am Yisrael directly, panim b'fanim, the 10 commandments. Now remember, or the 10 statements, which was the contract. And remember, at least the first 2, according to Ramban, all the first 10 were given in a different level than the remaining laws, because at panim b'fanim, we all stood at Har Sinai and encountered God. How directly we heard God speak, that's a different question. But Am Yisrael stood at Har Sinai and had some vision of God as God spoke to Dibro. They heard God speak. How much they understood, a different question. But the idea of panim b'fanim, a phrase which is used to how God talked to Moshe Rabbeinu later on, this was the entire nation speaks to panim b'fanim. Anyone know what the basis of Ramban's? How does Ramban know that God spoke to Am Yisrael panim b'fanim? Is there a source?
Anyone tells us this in Bet Chana.
Very good. In Sefer Devarim, in chapter 5 in Sefer Devarim, in the introduction to the 10 Commandments in Sefer Devarim in chapter 5, he makes a statement in verse 4, Panim b'fanim diber Hashem bahar b'toch ha'esh. God spoke to you directly. Now, I'll show you why that might be up for an argument. Why? I'll stop the share for a second. And I'll open up my Chumash.
It's also this parasha. Hashem tells Miriam, panim adaber elav.
No, but I'm saying, Ramban's saying that God spoke to the entire nation, panim b'fanim.
Okay. Thank you.
No, but you're right. He said, "Halo gam banu diber," right? No, it's God spoke to. Yeah, I'll show you the.
Yeah, but banu is Miriam and Aaron.
That's a good question. And then, but Moshe answers back that the way God talked to Moshe was different. Was it different all the time or only the first time? And I have to find my website. Where are we? Oh, here we are. My drive.
When the people asked for Hashem not to speak to them, but to speak through Moshe.
Yeah. So here, let me show you where the argument is. In chapter 5 in Devarim, and when Moshe begins his speech in chapter 5, Moshe tells the people, listen up, Shema Yisrael, to the laws I'm teaching you. And then Hashem Elokeinu kratim onu brit b'chorev. God made a covenant with us in Har Sinai, but it wasn't only with your parents, it was with you as well. Then he says as follows, in Pasuk Daled, Panim b'fanim, diber Hashem imachem bar mitoch ha'esh. God spoke to you directly from the fire. And then he says, I stood as the middleman between you and God at that time, Beit Hai, to tell you the words of God, because you were afraid of the fire and you didn't go up the mountain. So there's 2 ways to understand these 2 psukim. This could have been God's original plan. God wanted to speak to you, but b'fanim, was willing to, and you got scared before it started, right? And begged me to be the middleman. And this is all explaining an introduction to how the 10 Commandments were given. Or it could be panim b'fanim is referring to how God gave the 10 Commandments to Am Yisrael, and Pasuk Hey is how God gave the rest of the commandments through Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, what follows is the 10 Commandments, which were panim b'fanim, and then the story how they all got scared. So,
but the structure of the psukim don't allow the second explanation because
so there's 2 ways to understand this. I can understand that panim b'fanim was God's plan, original plan for everything, but they got scared after the 10 Commandments, and plus the case talking about everything after the 10 Commandments. Or I could understand it. God wanted to speak panim b'fanim, the entire 10 Commandments to everybody, and you got scared, and you didn't go up the mountain, but you stood at a distance, but you still heard God directly. So again, Ramban clearly understands this as panim b'fanim is the 10 Commandments, okay? And this is after the 10 Commandments. So I'm saying Ramban is in his pirush, in his commentary, he's saying God spoke to us panim b'fanim based on this pasuk. And he understands this pasuk as referring to the 10 Commandments, and this pasuk is everything afterwards, which makes a lot of sense. He's reading straightforward. But you could argue, depends how you read Perek Yotet. Now let's go back to our Ramban. Sorry for the tangent. Back to my share and back to my source sheet. Here we go. Okay, so let's follow the Ramban. God spoke to Am Yisrael panim b'fanim, the Ten Commandments. V'tziva otam aydei Moshe ksat mitzvot. Again, he's following exactly the psukim in Sefer Dvarim, as well as the contents in Sefer and Parshat Mishpatim, because after the Ten Commandments, in the end of Parshat Yitro, after we have the story of the people getting scared, and he commanded them by way of Moshe. Remember, God telling Moshe, we'll see this again, some of the mitzvot, which we call Parshat Mishpatim, and this is really important. Shehem kmo avot lemitzvotei shel Torah. Here, avot means principles, like basic principles, like avot melachot of Shabbat.
Right.
Give me a good word for that in English. Is there a word for avot like avot melachot? Are they just principles? The 39 melachot of Shabbat, or arba avot nizikin. They're categories.
Categories or criteria.
Okay, I'm looking for like a special word.
Utterances.
No. Utterances are deep.
Major categories.
Yeah, categories, but they're basic principles. There's avot and toledot.
Right.
Like the
Bullet
halachot
points.
of Shabbat. There's key principles, avot, and then there's derivatives, toledot.
And then consequences.
Now, I want somebody to tell me, why is Ramban calling? I want you to appreciate Ramban today. Ramban is referring to laws in Parshat Mishpatim as avot, principles of the mitzvot of the Torah. Anyone want to guess why, or want to have it try?
It's like a foundation. It's the foundation of the mitzvot, the basics.
I could say it that way, but it doesn't say yisodot. Avot are more. I go more to general categories, but I'll show you what he's getting it from. Here, I'll help you out a little bit. Going back to my Chumash again. Let's look at Parshat Mishpatim for a minute, and tell me if this sounds familiar. Let me open up my Chumash. I'll open up an English one to make this easier. Exodus. Here we go, chapter 21. Okay, I'll just go right in the middle chapter here. One second. Here, that's the thing. How's this? Here. B'chiak here. I'm sorry, one second here. B'chi gach shor ish o isha umet v'sako yistakel hashor. Got it? Bim shor nagachu mitmol shel shom. But what mesechet is this? V'chiftach ishbor.
Bava
Or
Kama.
yichre ishbor.
Bava Kama.
Yeah. And what's the first mission in Bava Kama?
Arba Avot Nazikin.
Yeah. And what's the source of Arba Avot Nizikin? There are 4 general categories of damages. That when a human can cause financial damage to another human being through assault, right? That's makish v'meit mot yumat, etc. And different types of assault, one human hitting another. His property causing damage, ki gach shor. His actions causing damage, like a boar, etc., like the thing, or his animal eating from someone else's field. It's not intention to hurt, but just normal eating. It's called shane, etc. If you learn Masechet Nizikin, starts with Bava Kama, then the first missions are Bavot Nizikin, and Masechet Nizikin understands the laws in Parshat Mishpatim as principles. You with me? And I think that's the reason why Ramban uses the word avot here. You follow? I want to take a little time today to appreciate. I'll tell you a little secret. Rabbi J wants to start this series next week. So he asked me if I could stall a little bit today. So but to begin the series, so I want to just share with you, Ramban's just awesome. So I want to share with you, I want you to learn how to appreciate a Ramban when you read him. That every word he writes everything's a pearl. Let's go back to a Ramban here on the source sheet. So again, he spoke to Am Yisrael panim fanim the Dibrot. Then he commanded them ksat mitzvot by way of Moshe. We'll go back and see that, which are avot for the mitzvot of the Torah. He's tying already Torah shebichtav and Torah shebapeh together. I learned Parshat Mishpatim not to find laws, but I derive principles. And then when I have to actually paskin, when I have to actually decide what halach is, I have to say, remember, lo kari abor, kari ashor, etc., back and forth. When I have to decide, each one's a principle with what's called kavanah lazik and in kavanah lazik. If you remember, Masechet Nizikin and Bava Kama. So there's a principles they have to apply. So these are principles for all the mitzvot of the Torah. And now look what he says next. Kasher hinhigu rabotenu imagerim shvaim litahed. He's comparing what happened at Har Sinai to a process of conversion. And what we went through at Har Sinai is similar to what we do with converts who want to become Jewish. You don't have to teach them all the mitzvot. They have to make a commitment to want to be a person in the service of God. And we teach them what? We don't teach them everyone. When we teach converts, we teach them basic principles of Judaism. Like our custom. The rabbis have a custom when they teach converts, basic principles before they get to all the details. Got the idea? So he's comparing Mamad Har Sinai to a type of mass conversion of the Jewish people. Of course, and remember, there's a law that we try to talk them out of it. So it doesn't seem like that's happening in Shemot, but when we read Sefer Yoshua does something very similar to what we do with converts. Tell them it's not worth it. It's a big responsibility, and we try to get them. We want to make sure that their intentions are sincere. And first, we try to talk them out of it to make sure that they really want to do the job. So those are the two stages. That's going to be the Dibrot, followed by Parshat Mishpatim. And he gives the example of conversion. Step 3. V'Yisrael kiblu alehem lasot kol ma shetzaveh ma'idei Moshe. What chapter is that? Just real quick, make sure you're awake. What's he referring to in step 3? Am Yisrael is makabel, to do everything God commanded by way of Moshe.
Naseh v'nishma?
Yeah. So it's Naseh v'nishma, okay, together with the explanation in Sefer Dvarim.
Right.
Because there again, V'Yisrael kiblu alehem lasot kol ma shetzaveh ma'idei Moshe. So we have that mefurash in. I'm going back to Dvarim again. When the people get scared in Sefer Dvarim, I had that before, and I'll just go right to the Dvarim that's opened in chapter 5. Oh, what happened to chapter 5 in Dvarim? They all got scared. God heard everything. The people said like the following. Okay. Kravata, the people tell Moshe Rabbeinu, you go and listen to everything God's going to command us. Okay. You tell us everything God will tell you. V'shamanu v'asinu. See that they have the right order, not naseh v'nishma v'naseh. So they took upon themselves everything they hear in the name of Moshe Rabbeinu, they'll keep. But what I'm getting at is that if I'm reading Ramban correctly, Ramban is writing his commentary on Sefer Shemot based on the careful reading of the parallel story in Sefer Dvarim. We found 3 examples of that already, haven't we? The panim b'panim, and then and then asking for the what did we just read here? When they ask him, "V'Yisrael kiblu alehem lasot kol ma shetzaveh ma'idei Moshe." Now, and then v'karati man brit al zeh, he made a brit with them. That's clearly chapter 24. Which, of course, Ramban holds, he keeps in order. Chazal is going to take chapter 24, the Brit Naseh v'nishma and Shemot, and move it to before Har Sinai. He's going to say it's happening after Har Sinai because he keeps chapter 24 in order. That'll be our big topic of discussion later on in the weeks to come. Okay? So basically, this is Pasha Yitro, chapter 19-20. This is chapters 21 through 23. Okay? And then this is going to be chapter 24. The first part of chapter 24. Now, in other words, he's just reviewing basically everything in Roman numeral number 1 that we talked about here. He just went through step by step everything in this section. Got that? So he's tying it all together. And now he's explaining why we're going from here to the commandment to build the Mishkan. Now, watch how he ties this back to the covenant we made in chapter 19. Watch what he says as follows now. Me'ata, okay? Listen carefully. After chapter 24, when we accept the covenant after hearing all the details or more details, Mi'ata, hinehem lo la'am v'hu yalalanihim. Now they're now his nation, and he'll be their God. Kasher idalem mitchila. Now, as he made the condition in the beginning. Now, where's this coming from? Where's this phrase coming from? And now that they accepted in chapter 24, now it's after the 4 steps. After Kratimam Brit Lekaimam, after we made a Brit to keep all these laws, now he says, now Him lo la'am v'hu yalalhim. We're his nation, he's our God. Now, it didn't say that in chapter 24. But what's he building that phrase on?
From Yitro, from the beginning, from before Matan Torah.
It says, I want exactly this phrase. Him lo la'am v'hu yalalhim. Now, he says he's got to quote from Yitro, the original proposition, which isn't exactly that wording. I can see this. He's got to quote from Yitro, but then Shemot Yishmu b'kolim. But I want these phrases, Hine lo la'am v'hu yalalhim, at Har Sinai. Again, today's Ramban Appreciation Day. So basically, we have to go do a different book. Let's take a look at Sefer
in
Vayikra.
beginning of Bechukotai.
Exactly, very good. Let's take a look at the beginning of Bechukotai. I think which began in Parshat Bahar, if I'm not mistaken. We open up our Chumash and we'll do the English Hebrew one this time. We'll go right to Vayikra. And we go to chapter 25. God spoke to Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor, etc. He goes on and on laws of Shemitah and Yovel. And then in chapter 26, we have short things as the commandments. If you follow my laws, etc. And then he says as follows: "Ufaniti alechem, okay, v'freiti etchem v'beiti etchem, v'kimoti et briti etchem." Remember this phrase. V'achatem yashan shamatem mishkani b'tocham. Then he says, "V'talachti b'tochachem." I'll walk among you. V'ayitei lachem le'Elohim v'atem tudi la'am. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. See that phrase? V'ayitei lachem le'Elohim v'atem tudi la'am. Now, and then Ani Hashem Elechem Asher Tzeitet Echem Eretz Mitzrayim Miot Lechem Avadim. That's the first line of the Ten Commandments. So Ramban now is taking the line in Parsha Bechukotai, which relates to Har Sinai, especially in this context. What's he say? V'natati mishkani. Where's it? V'natati mishkani b'tocham. Here. V'natati mishkani b'tochachem. See why he's quoting this one? Because he's about to explain the Mishkan. Okay. V'talachti b'tochachem v'ayiti lachem Elohim v'atem tudi la'am.
I don't know, I'm not following you. So, but that happened after.
No. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying in Parsha Bechukotai, he's going back to what happened in Parsha Bahar. I'm saying the concept is in Parsha Bahar. You can argue when this was given. It was given in Har Sinai, but the phrases that the Ramban is using, he's taking a phrase about Har Sinai, about the commitment to be God's people at Har Sinai, which relates to the Mishkan, and this idea of V'talachti b'tochachem, v'ayiti lachem v'atem tudi la'am. He's using the wording of Parsha Bechukotai in his commentary on Sefer Shemot. That's what I'm trying to show you. I'm trying to say how careful Ramban is when he's quoting all the different words. Now, before I actually go back, as long as I have the Chumash open, I should really show you another source for what he's saying. If I go back to this side, if I go back to Sefer Shemot in chapter 6, this is looking forward to the Exodus. Remember the 4 cups? Etc. ולקחתי אתכם לי לעם והייתי לכם לאלוהים. וידעתם כי אני השם המוציא אתכם מתחת סביבות מצרים. That's in Parsha Va'era, that's what's going to happen. So this is getting out of Egypt. והוצאתי והצלתי וגאלתי. This would be Har Sinai, ולקחתם לי לעם והייתי לכם לאלוהים. And this would be coming to the land, והבאתי לכם אל הארץ. So that wording actually began already in Parsha Va'era in anticipation of Har Sinai. And we have it mufurash in Parshat Bechukotai. So if I go back now to back to the Ramban himself, where are we? Zoom, there we go. Zoom and
Does he explain what does it mean? והייתי לכם לאלוהים? I mean, it could mean so many things. It could mean that he was like the king. That means that he was the
so perfect. Listen carefully now. Why is he using that phrase now? Because he says that's a fulfillment of the detailed explanation of what this means. But here it's the short version is in Bechukotai and also in Vayera. He's going to explain that This phrase, which comes up over and over again in Chumash and later over Tanakh, all through Yirmiyahu for sure, idea that I'm your people, that you're my people, and I'm your God, that relationship, which basically is explaining what Anochi Hashem Elokech means, I'm your boss, and you're chosen to serve me, right? That's the fulfillment of what the condition he made in the beginning, before we got the Ten Commandments, in chapter 19 in Parsha Yitro. Remember what we call the proposition, V'atem Shemot tishmu b'koli u'shmartem et briti. Then you'll be my skula mikol amim. V'atem tiudim mamlechet koni v'goy kadosh. He's saying, you take upon yourself to keep my covenant and obey me. That will make you my treasured nation, even though I'm the God of all the people, of all the land. And that will make you a priestly kingdom and a nation separated to serve me. So that's a more detailed explanation of what this means later on in Chumash. It's the commitment that Am Yisrael makes to accept God's proposition to be a nation serving Him forever. So the detailed explanation is in chapter 19. The short version, we're going to find the rest of Chumash at Tem Tulam V'Anochi Lev Milhim. Remember Yom Kippur davening, Anu Amecha Ata Eloheinu? It's right there. Now that we're working for God and we accepted the commitment, understanding what it means, and the laws that come with it, we had a sampling of the mitzvot of what commitment we're making, and now the nation as a whole is now converted basically to become a nation in the service of God. Hinehem Kedoshim. Okay, where's that coming from? Kedoshim Tiyu Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem. Remember Vayikra 19. Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokechem, which is, remember Kedoshim is the Ten Commandments.
Well,
explained. Hinehem Kedoshim.
down the
I want you to appreciate how Ramban's tying all the different books together.
Avot Klalim are being broken down.
Second, let me do the.
Till we go to.
Gotta do a quick mute.
Avot Klalim till we go down to the.
Okay, sorry about that. Alrighty. Now back to share. Okay, sorry about that. Share and back to the Ramban over here. Okay. So now he has to explain now why after Parshat Mishpatim and after Nasa V'Nishma in chapter 24, why is the first topic when Moshe goes up to Har Sinai for the first 40 days? Why is the first topic the Mikdash? Now that we're in Am Kadosh, we're set aside to serve God. We're worthy now to have a symbol of God's presence in our midst. Oh, why is that kept pulling up? I gotta find a way how to turn off that AI every time he pops up. Okay. So now we're worthy, Ru'im, She'ela Mikdash, Lashrosh Shechinato B'neim. Now that we accepted that commitment to be God's people, now we need a clubhouse where we're going to meet God. And now we're worthy to have a place, a house for God. And that's our title, a house for God, Abim, Lashrosh Shechinato B'neim. The Shekhinah should be amongst them. Now, but he's making a big deal. We'll see why how the Torah is going to go a house for God, or a model house for a home for us. Remember, Vasul Mikdash for Shachanti B'tochom Na B'tocho. So God needs a Mikdash so He can dwell among us, not in the Mikdash. You understand what I'm getting at? The idea, God doesn't need a temple because He needs a place to live or to dwell. We need to build a temple so that He can dwell among us in our homes, in our camp. Okay. Therefore, the first commandment when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days is the Mishkan. Shelo bait b'tocham, not b'tocho, got it? Bukdash lishmo. Set aside for his reputation, for us to come visit with him. V'sham yidaber im Moshe v'yitzaved b'nei Yisrael. And there, he'll continue to talk to Moshe Rabbeinu, give directions, instructions, more laws, and command any commandments that come to Bnei Yisrael. Now comes the anchor. Not just his pirush, but basically his whole approach to what's called Nigla and Nisra, we'll see in a minute. Right? Watch how he's going to tie in his understanding of what we call Kabbalah into Pshat of Chumash. V'soda Mishkan, whenever the Ramban uses the word sod, you know it's something Kabbalistic, correct? When he uses the word sod, it's going to be important. So there's something deeper to the Mishkan. This is what he says. Sheyeh hakavod asher shachan al Har Sinai, shochen alav benistar. Now, why would you call what happened at Har Sinai, why would you call that Nigla? He's not saying the word Nigla here, but he's referring to Nigla. Why would you call Har Sinai Nigla? Wait, Dorit, unmute. You were saying something.
Yeah, I was saying because the whole nation was a witness to the revelation.
Panim b'fanim, right?
That's right.
That's as Nigla as could be. Now what's he saying? Har Sinai was Nigla. What's the Mishkan going to be? Nistar. I'm sure you're all familiar with the basic concepts of Kabbalah. There's Nigla and Nistar. Now, what's a higher Madrega, Nigla or Nistar? That's a great discussion. But if you can live with nature, and when God's hidden, or appears to be hidden in nature, and feel like you're Nigla, if I can have, if my connection to God is as though I'm standing and seeing God directly in a situation where I don't see Him directly, so that's a very high level to be at. Now, in what way is God Nistar in the Mishkan? Because what's going to represent God in the Mishkan will be the Aron, but the Aron is covered, isn't it? It's covered first in an ark. First, the Aron, the Luchot are in ark. The ark is covered with the kaporet, and the kaporet's covered with the Mishkan and the porochet, etc. There's covering after covering, and therefore we have a symbol of God, but it's hidden. Now, and therefore, Vaya b'Mishkan tamid im Yisrael hakavod shenireh lehem b'Har Sinai. The same Kvod Hashem, His presence, His glory, that was felt at Har Sinai, was with them in the Mishkan, but in a hidden way. Got it? And that's, I said, that's the illusion, Kabbalah concept of Nigla and Nistar. Now, what's his proof? He's going to take the key verses in Shemot Chavdal, which we'll see that Kvod Hashem was on Har Sinai and Moshe goes up the mountain. Right? And then we have the same verse later on in Sefer, at the end of Sefer Shemot, when the Mishkan is built, Mishkan, Kvod Hashem alei et Mishkan. We'll see that parallel in detail when we go through the book. But basically, takes the same verse that written in Chumash when Moshe goes up to Har Sinai for the first 40 days. We have the same verse when in chapter 40 at the end of Sefer Shemot when the Shekhinah dwells on the Mishkan at the end of the book. Okay. Now, what I want to do next is simply review what we did, the key events in Har Sinai. Remember we talked about the proposition. We arrive at Har Sinai and God pops the question, do you want to be a nation serving me? Followed by preparation, the 3 days of preparation for the big moment and discussion of how directly God will meet them. I'll go over each part again in a second. Then the revelation itself that began, and then we called limitation, and that was a complicated section, which we'll have to go back to. The first Hebrew given in first person, the last 8 Hebrew given in third person, and then the fair story, which I'll explain what my names and giving in a minute, followed by the legislation unit, Parshat Mishpatim, followed by, I call it jubilation, that's the Brit Nasavadishma in chapter 24. I'll go over this in a second. Just want to give you the titles. Let me explain what I'm getting at. I want to show you what I have here. I have a map of basically chapters 19 through 24. Okay? Notice, I want to show you how, when I outline and summarize everything happened from chapter 19 to 24, I'll see all the steps Ramban's talking about, all 4 steps. Now, chapter 19, we arrive at Har Sinai, and the big event that we spent so much time on was the proposition. Remember, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, look what I did for you. God tells Moshe, tell the people, Vata im Shemot tishmu b'koli, are you going to obey me and keep my brit? Remember the covenant coming up? That will make you my treasured nation, even though I'm the God of all the land. And that will make you a mamlachat kohen kadosh. That's the conditions. Elo advarim asher tedaber b'nei Yisrael. Remember, those are the terms. And then the Am Yisrael accepts it in the next 2 psukim. And then we accept it in principle. But now we have to prepare for the revelation. It's going to happen 3 days later on Har Sinai. God's original plan was to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu in the thickness of a cloud so the people would overhear. That was more of a buffered. We called that plan A way back when we discussed this. And then the people requested something more direct, we call plan B, that God would appear to all of them. What actually happened was a whole argument that, what level did they actually encounter God? But on the day of revelation, on day 3, in chapter 19, verses 16 to 19, remember, God appears on Har Sinai, but the people are back in the camp and they're scared. Moshe brings it back to the foot of Har Sinai. And then when it comes to the big moment of revelation, there's a long shofar blowing, and Moshe would speak and God would answer him. Rashi explains Moshe spoke the last 8 Dibrot, or the first directly. Again, I'm not going to do the whole complicated argument about how to read this pasuk. But basically, in chapter 19, God reveals himself in a way which was sort of ambiguous, how directly we heard from God. And then Moshe warns the people. God tells Moshe to warn the people not to come too close and not to look. And then we get the Dibrot, the first two in first person. Onochi Hashem Elokecha. Remember? Nothing al panai. And then the last 8 Dibrot being in third person. Remember? Lo tisat Shem Hashem Elokecha dashav. And the change from first person to third person leads Chazal to understand the first 2 were given directly from God. Panim Fanim, in the last 8, Moshe is the middleman. Again, Ramban himself doesn't follow that, but that was the background to the way Chazal understand it. Now, we're going to read now after the Dibrot, the people got scared. We read that as well, and that was the ambiguous psukim where Moshe says, don't be afraid, because God wants you to be fearful. We talked about that intentional ambiguity and that balance between the need for fear but not to be too fearful. Remember, Moshe says, Al tiro, because God's coming to test you. And then the people stand at a distance. Moshe goes up and gets the rest of the laws. And then we have the Parsha Mishpatim unit that we talked about last week. We call legislation, chapters 21 through 23, basically, which are primarily civil laws, Parsha Mishpatim, and then laws about ethical behavior from the middle. We did this whole discussion last week, enveloped by how to serve God and how not to serve God in the beginning and the end with the Shosh Regalim. And then the promise of the land, and then the covenant at the end of chapter 24 of Nasa V'Nishma. We'll go back and read that in a minute. Now, so that's I'm showing you, that's the summary of chapters 19 through 24. And I'm showing you the Ramban basically summarized them in his 4 steps of, remember, Moshe spoke to the Panim B'Fanim, that's chapters 19 and 20. Command them some of the mitzvot, like Parshat Mishpatim, which are avot. Okay, and Am Yisrael was makabel them to listen from Moshe, and they made a brit, and they sprinkled the blood, etc. inside. And now when chapter 24 is over, we fulfill the original commitment of chapter 19, and that's why the next topic will be the Mishkan. Now, we're going to use this next drawing a lot over the next couple weeks, but I have these 4 boxes. I'll use my little arrows here, and I need an arrow. There we go. Okay. Chapters 19 through 24, right over here. That was the unit we just talked about. And what follows in Chumash is going to be the Mishkan. So if I follow Chumash in order, we go from here to here. And that's why the Mishkan is first. When Moshe is giving the command of the Mishkan to Am Yisrael, in the meantime, Chet Egel happens. So chronologically, after this, we get that. And after Chet Egel, we get Binyan HaMishkan. And then, that's how do we erase this? There, erase all that. Then, Chazal understand it differently. Remember, Rashi will say, after Mamad Har Sinai first happened was Chet Egel, the laws of Moshe got will be a different set of laws. And after Chet Egel, we get the laws to build the Mishkan, and then we build the Mishkan afterwards. That's going to be the order according to Chazal. Or in our class, we'll talk about the reason for the Machloket and why it happened. Now, what I want to end the shiur today is we're going to read what I call the drawings, and we're going to go back and read this section, chapter 24, the covenant, and see why there's an argument when it happened. So let's go back to share my screen, or stop the share, and back to Sefer Shemot, and we'll finish up quickly. Share. Remember the unit we did last week? At the end of chapter 20, we had the 10 Commandments are over, and the unit began with B'yom Hashem el Moshe. God told Moshe, Kol Tamar, say the following to Bnei Yisrael, and that went to the end of chapter 23. Now, chapter 24 begins as follows. Now, that was the whole unit of mitzvot, and therefore, what should Moshe do now? He should tell the people what God told him. And again, if I read chapter 24 starting with Pasuk Gimel, Moshe came and told the people all the words of God and all the mishpatim, and the people answered together, everything God said will do. If Perak Chavdal began in Pasuk Gimel, everything would make perfect sense. Then Moshe writes everything down. He gets up in the morning, he builds a mizbeach at the bottom of the mountain, 12 monuments for each of the 12 tribes. He sends young people of Israel and they bring sacrifices. They built an altar. Moshe takes the blood, and then Vaikach Sefer Abrit in verse 7, 24/7, he reads it out loud to the people, and everyone answers, Kol Asher Diber Seven Seven Ishma. Moshe takes the blood, sprinkles it on the people, and says, this blood represents the covenant that God's convening with you on these conditions that we just read, the Parshat Mishpatim. And then Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and 70 elders go up and accept this covenant on behalf of the people. They have this vision of God. They see God, bright vision, and nothing happens to them, good or bad, big argument among the Parshanim. Then Moshe goes up for the first 40 days. So again, if everything began with Pasuk Gimel, we keep it in order. The problem is chapter 24 begins with Pasuk Aleph, which is a bit unclear. What's it say? Ve'el Moshe Amar, which sounds like what they call past perfect. In other words, Chumash now is telling the reader, in addition to what we said before, let me go back to when the Ten Commandments were over, we had the story of everyone being scared, and God tells Moshe, the people standing at a distance. Moshe goes in to tell where God was. That was the story of the fear. Then it says, Vayomer Hashem and Moshe, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, go tell the following to Bnei Israel. That was the whole unit we did last week. We called Parshat Mishpatim. When that's over, Moshe should tell this to the people. And that's what we thought we read in chapter 24. But if I go back now to chapter 24 and read from the beginning, it doesn't begin with Pasuk Gimel that we expect. Instead, it tells something in past perfect. And God had told Moshe, come up the mountain, come up to God, you and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 elders, and bow down from a distance. It sounds like Moshe's, in addition to telling Moshe Rabbeinu, laws of Parshat Mishpatim, God also instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to conduct a ceremony where the leadership group of the people are going to come up the mountain to accept the brit on behalf of the people. And then God's still talking to Moshe and telling, afterwards Moshe will go by himself to God. The 70 elders with Nadav and Avihu won't come together with Moshe, and the people don't go up at all. There's the three groups. Remember these three groups? There's Moshe by himself. Later, the 70 elders with Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and then the people at the bottom of the mountain. So at the bottom of the mountain are the people. Coming up the mountain, but bowing down from a distance would be Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and 70 elders. And Moshe himself will go up the mountain by himself later on to talk directly to God. Now, because of that, everyone but Ramban. Rashi is going to take these psukim and claim this is all happening back in chapter 19. In other words, I'll show you exactly where in chapter 19. If I go back to chapter 19, we had the proposition. Remember, Moshe comes up to God. God tells him, go say the following to Am Yisrael. Look what I did for you. I took you out of Egypt. I brought you on the wings of eagles. And now, that was a proposition. Im Shemot Yishmo B'Koli, you're willing to obey me and keep my brit. You'll be my skula. And that will make you Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. That was the terms. And Bnei Israel answered. Moshe relayed that to the elders. All these terms. The elders relayed to the people. The people told the elders, and the elders relayed back to God. That whole nation answered everything God said will do. And Moshe relayed that answer back to God. And now we're ready for the contract. From Pasuk Tet is how we're going to hear the contract. Now, there's going to be 3 days of preparation. Remember, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go to the people, get ready, because on day 3, God will appear to them. Now, the way Chazal understand that during these 3 days of preparation, before we get the Ten Commandments, there's going to be a special ceremony where this affirmation of the proposal, this accepting the proposal, which is sort of verbal here, but Moshe told the people, and the people answered, everything God said we'll do. Instead of just saying that verbally, we're going to make a ceremony out of it. And therefore, Chazal can understand that Pasachet now is going to lead to a detailed covenant, which is described as a postscript in chapter 24 when the whole unit's over. So in light of these psukim, we're going to read chapter 24. So right here in Pasachet in chapter 19, when the people answered everything God said we're going to do, I'm going to follow Rashi now for a minute. We're going to read that now Moshe comes, told the people all the words of God. That was the proposition. And all the mishpatim, which is not Parshat Mishpatim according to Chazal, but rather the laws of keeping 3 days, of keeping your distance for 3 days, not to be ready to wash your clothes, not to touch your wives, etc. And the people answered everything, all these terms of 3 days preparation we're going to do. During these 3 days, Moshe writes down the words of God, which are the proposition, in a formal document. He gets up, he builds a mizbech at the bottom of the mountain with 12 monuments representing the 12 tribes. They bring olot and shlamim. They bring sacrifices to God, and sacrifices they're going to eat, the shlamim. Moshe takes the blood of the sacrifices, puts them in big containers. He takes Sefer Abrit, which could be what he wrote down here, which could be basically the proposition. It's the official proposition. Are you willing to be my people? Then Chazal understand this is before the Ten Commandments. So Sefer Abrit has to be the terms of the covenant beforehand. Chazal, Rashi is going to say even the terms going back to Sefer Bereshit. We'll go back to that Shita soon. He reads it out loud, and the people answer now, Kol Sheri Be'Hashem Naseh V'Nishma. Okay? Then Moshe sprinkles the blood and says, Hine Dam Abrit Asher Krat Hashem Al Dvarim Eila. Now, if Moshe is going to read something in public to a mass gathering of people, let's see if Naseh V'Nishma would fit the proposition. Remember what the proposition was? Let's go back to, I'll go back to the other source sheet, it'll be easier. Look at the proposition that we had in before. The proposition was as follows. The proposal. What was it? Vata. Im Shemot tishmo b'koli. Ushmartem et briti. And then you'll be a mamlechet kohen kadosh. If that's a Sefer Abrit, the Moshe is reading out loud. Look what if the Divrei Hashem, the proposition, is what's written inside the thing the Moshe reads aloud at that big ceremony. So answering Naseh V'Nishma would make a lot of sense with Im Shemot tishmo b'koli. That's the Nishma. Ushmartem et brisi. That would be the Naseh. That would make you maskula, and that would make you one of Mamlechet Kohanim Kadosh. In other words, if I'm looking at it as if I want to follow what Chazal is saying, I can take this ceremony and say, what Moshe is reading out loud in Sefer Abrit are Divrei Hashem. Remember, what did Moshe write down? Remember Divrei Hashem? Eila hadvarim asher tedaber b'nei Yisrael. If I go back again to chapter 24, is that here? What does Moshe write down? Moshe comes by Saper La'am et Kol Divrei Hashem. Okay, and he writes down Divrei Hashem, and then he writes down in Sefer Abrit. Now, and then what happens? That leadership group comes up to see God, and they get away with it. Now, Ramban, the Rib is not going to explain it this way, but Chazal going to understand it this way. I want to just end the shir today to try to explain to you why Chazal understand it this way. Something happens next. Let's go back to chapter 24. And look what happens in chapter 24 right after we say Naseh V'Nishma. Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu go up, and the 70 elders go up, and they see the God of Israel, and the bottom of his feet was the brightest thing you could see, but they have some vision of God that they see God, and nothing happens to them. Okay? And they saw God, and they drank the korbanot, etc. That's a ceremony that, according to Chazal, happened before Har Sinai. What's the anchor? What anchors that Pirush? I think it's this unit in chapter 19. If I go back to chapter 19, right before the Dibrot, look what it says right before the Dibrot, starting in verse 20. What's it say? Vayired Hashem Har Sinai, al Rosh Har, Vaikra Hashem al Moshe, al Rosh Har Moshe. We're chapter 19, right before the Dibrot. Moshe comes down on Har Sinai to the top of the mountain, calls Moshe to come up. Vayomer al Moshe. Okay. God tells Moshe, Reid ha'edbam, go warn the people. Pein yarsu el Hashem lirot v'nafam mimenu rav. Before the Dibrot are given, he warns the people, don't you dare come up and look, because if you look, people are going to die. Okay? There was a last minute warning before the Dibrot. He warns the people, don't go down and warn the people, because the people might go and look, and many people will die. And then he says, even the Kohanim who come closer to God, they have to be careful, because they might also be smitten by God. Now, if I keep Chumash in order, who are these Kohanim? They've never been mentioned before. If the story in chapter 24 that we just read happened during the 3 days of preparation, it makes perfect sense. Because what happened during 3 days of preparation? A special leadership group went up the mountain and they saw God, and nothing happened to them. And what's God afraid of now? Now that leadership group was able to see God, and they got away with it, and nothing happened to them. Now the entire nation is going to want to be like that leadership group. And therefore, at the last moment, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go warn the people. No looking, okay? Because it's too dangerous. And even the Kohanim who were able to look before, who saw before, who came closer to God, they also have to be careful. Okay? Let's God punish them as well. Then Moshe says, don't worry, they won't do it because you warned them. Difficult pasuk why Moshe is arguing with God. But God tells Moshe basically, go down and warn them. Come up with Aaron and warn them. And the Kohanim and the Am, don't they dare destroy themselves by going up the mountain, because God will come and punish them. And Moshe comes down and warns the people, like God told them. And then God says the Dibrot, when everyone's down below and no one can come and look. I'm just reading you how the rabbis understand it. What I'm saying is that these psukim that precede the 10 Commandments in chapter 19, after the 3 days of preparation, I think are the reason why that lead Chazal to say that the only way these psukim make sense if chapter 24 happened already. If the ceremony in chapter 24 happened already, that leadership group was able to see God and nothing happened to them, and then that might lead the people to think it's okay to see God, and therefore the last minute warning before the Dibrot, God tells Moshe, go warn the people, no looking, and even the Kohanim who came up earlier, they can't look as well, and only Moshe and Aaron can come up to the top of the mountain. Anyway, that's where I want to show you. If I want to explain, everyone knows the machloket between Rashi and Ramban that we'll talk about. I just think the psukim in the end of chapter 19 are the reason why Chazal understand that chapter 24 happened before the 10 Commandments. Of course, if I follow, Ramban keeps everything in order. We see that Ramban, and we don't have time to see it today, but that Ramban, maybe we'll see it real fast. Okay, where are we? Share my screen. I had it right here. I had Ramban. Here we go. Ramban on chapter 24. Yeah. Ramban, this is Ramban, the beginning of chapter 24. There's no English Hebrew for this one, is there? No. Oh, here. Okay. Moshe Amar. Okay. Okay. Parsha Zu Kodev Asher Tadibro. He's quoting Rashi. This Parsha, these 11 psukim, are before the 10 Commandments on the 4th of day of Sivan. That's Lashon Rabbeinu Shlomo, which is Rashi. And then, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Alei, that's in verse 12, it goes up to the verse 4. That's after Matan Torah. That's also Rashi. Okay. Then he says, if Rashi is correct, Ve'ena Parshiota Ba'ot Kesidran, Below Kamashman. Then he says, Chumash is in order. Rambam must keep Chumash in order. Says the Parshiot don't come. Okay. And then it says also, Moshe came and told the people all the words of God and the Mishpatim. And the Mishpatim must be Parshat Mishpatim. Okay? Shema Mishpatim Edo Ktuvim, in that unit from chapters 21 to 23. Shenemar Ve'eda Mishpatim Asher Tasim Lifnem. Now, then he disagrees with Rashi. Rashi says the Mishpatim are the laws of 3 days of separation and preparation. It couldn't be talking about the laws of the 7 Noachide laws, because they heard them already. And since Vayseper wouldn't be new things, not old things. And Ibn Ezra, he quotes Ibn Ezra, who disagrees with Rashi as well and keeps things in order. He says, I can't say for Abrit. Okay. And then he says the parsha go in order. Basically, we're going to see that Ramban. I was going to show you that the Ramban is going to be adamant to keep Chumash in order. And Chazal, as we all learned when we were young, we said Nasa B'nishma back in chapter 19, before we get to 10 Commandments. Anyway, so that was my little introduction today. I just want to share with you a careful study of the Ramban Shitav, keeping Chumash in order. I try to explain why he keeps it in order, keeping things making sense, but why Chazal are going to disagree with him because there are too many details in the story that don't make sense if I keep it in order. And then the question is, when you have this conflict of how to understand Psukim, Ramban's default is if it's not broken, don't fix it. It means if I can explain it in order, keep it that way. He'll only change the order if there's no choice, which he'll do sometimes. And Chazal are more quick to change the order because their assumption is Chumash is not in chronological order, the Chatchila, it's in thematic order and purposely moves things around. And we'll see that as we go through the whole system. Now, why am I making such a big deal about it? If I go back again to my source sheet, this big argument about these boxes was what came first, the commandment to build the Mishkan or Chet Egel, etc., is going to change how we understand the Mishkan. Because if the Mishkan is because of Chet Egel, then it seems like more like a second thought, not something that's so ideal. If the Mishkan is the most important thing coming right after Chet Egel, then it's got to be really important. So we have to see, it's the technical argument of what came first might turn into a theological argument about how important having a Mishkan is going to be. And that we'll have to talk about in the weeks to come. Now, what we're going to do in our series is we have to use the unit by itself. We'll do this unit all by itself and see what's inside as a standalone unit. Then we'll study the story of Chet Egel by itself as a standalone unit. And we have to understand then, if this commandment came first, we have to understand why is the story of Chet Egel so similar to the Mishkan. And if the Mishkan came first, like the way Chazal understand, which is the story they're so similar to when, how we build them, how the people sin with Chet Egel is very similar to what happens with the commandment to build the Mishkan, which will lead Chazal to understand that the Mishkan is because of Chet Egel. Then we have to ask the question, why is Chumash out of order? And that will. So basically, what we have to do to go through this section is study each section by itself, each box by itself. We just talked about Mamad Har Sinai in the last 2 classes. Then we have to study the commandment to build the Mishkan by itself, then Chet Egel by itself, and then try to understand what's the logic of, do I take this box and move it out of order, or do I keep it where it is? But first we have to understand what's inside each box to be able to make that comparison. Okay, let me see if there's any questions today. Let's see what I lost. Questions, chat. Here's the chat. No, that's it. Just a source sheet. Okay. No questions today. All right. Nicholas revealed. Okay. Nistar is hidden. Very good. Sorry for the, I should explain those words. Okay. Thanks, Judy, for answering that question. Nigla means seen and Nistar is hidden. Those are very popular jargon. Any quick
There is
question?
one question.
Yeah, sure.
Where was Aaron during all this? Chapter 19 implies that Aaron went with Moshe. Chapter 24 implies that Aaron did not. He stayed with Nadav and Abihu on the Shivim.
Yeah, so that's why when in Dvarim, with the stories afterwards, Moshe is there by himself without Aaron. And Aaron's with the people with Chet Egel. That's why it makes more sense. If Aaron goes up with Moshe Rabbeinu, it makes more sense he's going up with him before the 10 Commandments. There's so many reasons why it makes so much sense. When you read chapter 19 carefully, it makes so much, especially those last 5 lines in chapter 19 that we just read. Lord God warns the people, Moshe and Aaron, you come up. And without the Kohanim, without the Am, and no one can look, that makes so much sense if the ceremony in chapter 24 happened already. If if chapter 24 didn't happen yet, then all the details at the end of chapter 19 don't make any sense. It's like really strange. Because what's Aaron doing there? Why is Aaron going up again? It's just everything's the psukim at the end of chapter 19 make a lot of sense if chapter 24 happened already. If chapter 24 didn't happen yet, they're super confusing.
Where is Yoshua?
Yoshua, that's during the first when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days. Then we find Yoshua. Next week we're going to start with the second half of chapter 24 when God tells Moshe to come up the mountain to get to Luchot Even, the Torah and the Mitzvah, and that's going to be the background for Chet Egel and the Mishkan. What we're going to start with next week is going to be in chapter 24 here. And I'll just move the English Hebrew, will be easier. And this one, English Hebrew. In verse 12, God tells Moshe, there's a new parsha. God tells Moshe, come up the mountain and be there. Come up the mountain, and I'll give you Luchot Even and the Torah and the Mitzvah, which I'm writing. And then Moshe goes up with Yeshua, and Moshe's on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. We'll read that already. That will be the introduction to next week's share when Moshe goes up, and the question is going to be, what are the Luchot Even? We know what they are. What's the Torah and what's the Mitzvah? What are those words referring to? That's what makes the whole story so complicated. But next week we'll start understanding how Chumash I'm starting with Ramban to understand why Ramban makes so much sense. But today I want to appreciate Ramban, his wording and how he presents this thing. By the time we finish our series, I'll show you why Rashi is way better.
Thank you, תודה רבה, בשורות טובות.
Amen. We should pray for need a lot of siyata dishmaya.
Can I ask a question that is not related?
We need the siyata dishmaya and bishmaya.
Can I ask you a question that bothered me from the Parashat Ba'alotcha, which is not even
no problem,
related?
yeah.
Okay, it says in Parashat Ba'alotcha when Moshe is complaining, and then he sends to him to take people from, to help him out. But he already had that from Parashat Yitro. So what happened to those people? So why Moshe, who is complaining that he doesn't want to take care of the people or he needs help or whatever, where are those people that were taken in Parashat Yitro?
So if you look in Parashat Yitro, I'll show you right here. 1 second. In Yitro, what people does Moshe take? Where are we? No, but you look carefully. In Yitro's suggestion, where are we? Yitro's chapter 18. Here we go.
Yeah, it's
Yitro says as follows: Ken. Here, Ken. Atash Mabakoli, verse 19. I'll give you something. God should be with you. Okay? You're the man for that. I'm sorry. But you see from the people. You pick top people. You decide from the people, good people, but you're at Elohim, men of truth, people hate that. And you put them, make them the what do you call it? The Sari Alafim, Sari Miot, etc.
Right.
And they'll judge the people. But who does the choosing? Moshe chooses people he thinks are fit.
Okay.
What did God tell Moshe to do in this week? Those it doesn't say here there's 70, does he?
No.
It's Sari Alafim, etc.
Right.
But these are basically I call it education staff. Moshe teaching people the laws. And it's part of a teaching system of teaching the people the laws, what halach is, etc. Parshat Ba'alotcha is about hadracha staff. It's about hadracha is like counselors. It's like more political leaders. And God's telling Moshe Rabbeinu not to pick people that he thinks should lead, but rather Moshe is giving up. Moshe sort of can't take it anymore. What's God tell him to do? Look carefully what God tells him. V'yom Hashem Moshe. Esfel gathers 70 men, some important men, from the elders of Israel. Asher yadata ki heim zigneim b'shotrav. Take existing leaders. You don't choose them. Take people who are already leaders of the people. Okay? Take them with you and share your leadership with them. In other words, God's Yitro's telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you pick the people you think best for for chinuch stuff. Now we're talking about what's called, I call hadracha staff. I don't know what the word in English. Hadracha is like madrichim, like counselors or political leadership. Take people who are already natural leaders, already leading the people. You know they're already the elders of each tribe, and share your leadership with them. You can't do it all by yourself. But Yitro is talking more about educational leadership, teaching laws. This time about political leadership, dealing with complaints. Remember the people complaining about the food?
Right.
Moshe is not saying I can't teach them anymore. He says I can't deal with their they complain about the food, they complain that's counselor kind of problems, not educational problems.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
But
Thank
who
you.
are the Shivim Zikanim in chapter 19?
Probably most likely the same people, probably.
Yeah. Right.
Moshe didn't share. They were invited up, but Moshe didn't share his leadership with them. It seems like every Shevet had. I mean, we had Skenim back in at the burning bush, didn't we? In Egypt, there are tribal leaders. The political structure of Israel is tribal. The army is tribal, isn't it? It's more of like a united European Union more than United States in the sense, or at least the way United States was in the beginning. Of the tribal leadership is the main political leadership that's there, and Moshe is sort of gathering together as a group. Now, for Moshe to go to Pharaoh to represent all 12 tribes, he needs to get his credentials ratified by the elders of Israel. Remember, Lech v'sat ziknei Israel, before you go to Pharaoh and tell them the following. So there's existing leadership that Moshe didn't choose. They existed before.
So that means when Yitro told him, to choose, he didn't choose the existing leadership.
Exactly, yeah.
That's so weird. Yeah. Why wouldn't he do that?
Because they were looking for, because he's looking for people to help him teach. Remember, Moshe's teaching, asking questions. It's more educational questions,
No, it sounds to me like the judicial system.
Remember, it's chukei Elohim v'torotav.
No, so it's like the judicial system. So it's also, like a...
In camp, you have hadracha staff. You have hadracha staff. That's the bunk counselors and the, activities and things like that. And you have the educational staff that teach the kids, shiurim and Torah, etc. It's two different jobs.
Right.
Two different characteristics.
Okay. Interesting.
So, when the people complain about the food, Moshe says, I can teach them, I can give shir all day long, Moshe says. Complaining, deal with food, I can't deal with that. And that's why Moshe says, I can't deal with mundane questions like that. And God says, so then don't do it. Delegate it to the people there. You can't do it all yourself. That's why the story that Moshe tells over in Devarim is from Balotcha, not from Yitro. He's not hiding Yitro. He's hiding.
Okay.
The story in Devarim is remember remember is referring to Beit Ha'i is referring to when we left our Sinai in Parsha Balotcha.
Okay. Wow. That's very nice. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay.
Nobody, I asked it in shul and they didn't know how to answer. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, you have to read very carefully sometimes, but I'm pretty sure. I think it makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other quick questions?
Yeah, first of all, be safe and have a good week.
Okay.
In Parsha, something that always bothered me, and in Kasisa, when they're on the mountain, I guess, for the second time, okay, and Hashem says to them, you can only see my back because nobody can see me.
Stay alive, yeah.
I've always I've always been curious that why that's in
So yeah, in a nutshell, I'll explain to you your question. I'll share my screen. I'll show you what the question, what your question is referring to. I'll use this chumash better. I'll use here in it's going to be in chapter 34 here. Actually, chapter 33. And Moshe davens to God. Moshe davens to God and tells him, remember, Ray knows you're telling me to lead them. You're not coming with us. Remember after Chet Egel, and God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "I'll go with you, but not with them." And Moshe says, "If you don't come with all of us," etc. Moshe says, "You have to come with us, remember, and you can't come with me. Your shkin has to be with all of us." And God answers, "I'm gonna answer your request." And then Moshe wants to know how it's going to work. And God declares what we call midot rachamim. God declares what? Ani aver koti b'apanecha v'krati b'shem Hashem lefanecha v'achanit t'asherachem b'chem t'asherachem. That's going to become official with the second luchot. But God declares now midot rachamim. Okay. But right afterwards, the second midot rachamim, what's the price we pay? Bayomer lo tuchal lirot panai ki lo adam b'chai. Once God is what? It has midot rachamim. The direct encounter with God is going to be impossible. Why? When I meet at Adin, when you get what you deserve, so if you're perfect, you can encounter God. The second you can be God's people and not be perfect, the price you pay is you can't get that close to God. The clarity of your relationship with God is going to go down. Is going to go down a notch, because if immediate Adin, immediate reward, immediate punishment, the clarity of God's message is obvious. But the problem is it's hard to survive at that level. As soon as God declares Minat Rachamim, God says the price you're paying is you can't see God's image. You can't Lo Yidam B'chai, I don't think it's referring to being able to see God, but to be able to understand God with total clarity. To the point that you can't, the price you pay for Minat Rachamim is a lack of clarity in understanding the ways of God.
Wow.
Because if you don't get punished right away, you don't get rewarded right away either. And now, because of that, man's encounter with God is limited. And that's why, as soon as that happens, I need kapara, I need a buffer. If we're going to go and encounter God and come to the Mishkan, the way to encounter God is with an anan. There has to be a buffer inside, a buffer between man and God. But that buffer represents the price you're paying for Minat Rachamim is the lack of ability to see God panim b'panim. Now, with Moshe Rabbeinu, was that relate? Is God telling Moshe Rabbeinu that's for everybody? Right? Lo tuchal lirot panai is referring to Moshe Rabbeinu himself or all Klal Yisrael. Then when we learn the psukim, we have to do that in detail. There's a God's statement, because we said in this week's parsha, God told Miriam that the Moshe is panim b'panim. And the end of Chumash, God said Moshe is panim b'panim. So is that a stira with here? Or when God says Lo Yidam B'chai, is that talking about God's relationship with Am Yisrael now in light of Midat Rachamim? So when we do that unit, I'll try to explain that approach. But the question's good, but that's going to be that's a promo for when we do Chet Egel. What's the price we pay for Midat Rachamim? It enables us to be God's people, but there'll be a lack of clarity. But we'll do that in detail. Anyway, I have to finish. I have to catch 7:30 minute. Yeah.
Okay, good luck.
Nikki, you had a question? No? Okay, so I guess you were just saying goodbye. Okay, everyone have a good week. And again, I agree. We'll add our tefillot again. We go to Desata, Bishmaya, and Bishmaya.
Amen.
From heaven and in heaven. The views are just like it's like amazing. I mean, what's happening is just we just hope it'll turn out good, but it's a big the skies are alive. A little personal story. There's a picture of the building that was hit in Rehovot. So my son's an architect. So he said the building next to it, right next to it, that didn't fall apart. He says he designed that building in 2017. He was the architect who did that. Does that that looks familiar? It was like that's interesting.
Lucky.
Okay. Anyway, so we should pray for shalom and for ניצחון. Okay.
ניצחון.
Bye bye.
אמן. תודה רבה.
Thank you.